Okay, this is part 2 of the video lecture on writing your literature review based on the PowerPoint slides under Documents and Resources in week 3. So this is slide 7 that we left off on, or actually didn't get to, in the first video lecture on this topic. So if you look at Pattern E topics 23 and 26, you'll find the information on this slide. And I begin with a quote from Patton that I really like and that I'd like you to keep in mind when you're writing your literature review. It's from page 55 of Patton. And it is, an effective literature review presents the literature from your point of view, or in your own words. So you are evaluating other people's research, as I keep saying. What's important to remember is you are not just summarizing other people's articles like you did in the annotated bibliography. I don't just want a series of summaries. You need to organize it by topic or theme, as we've been talking about, or patterns or trends is another way to look at it, starting with the most recent literature by date. And you need to think about and discuss how the literature fits together or doesn't fit together, even if your way of addressing that is just how you organize the literature review. You need to take that into account in your broad view of the literature. So on page 61, example 1, there we can see how you take a broad view, how you take an overview of the literature and discuss it fitting together or not. It says factors that have been found to predict individual differences in job performance include, and then it gets into the various topics or trends or patterns: cognitive ability, conscientiousness, goal orientation, and motivation. That those are the main topics, trends, factors, in this case, discussed in previous literature, and then the literature review would probably go on to discuss each of those factors in terms of the articles in more detail. And it could even talk about where the literature agrees on a particular topic and where it doesn't agree. That can also go into your literature review, of course. Okay, moving on to the next slide. How do we end the literature review? So bringing the literature review to a close, this is based on Pattern E, topics 23 and 26. You end the literature review by repeating your main research question, problem or topic, and your hypothesis. So although it seems repetitive, you really want to bring every section of your research proposal to a close by reminding your readers of what your research question is again. Not in the exact same words every time, in different words, but you always want to bring readers back to that because they're reading a lot of pages, they're reading about all kinds of other details related to your research problem or topic, so it's always good to bring them back to the beginning again, bring them back to the whole reason why you're doing this research and what you expect to find. Very briefly at the end of the literature review, this is not the main place to elaborate on your research question or especially your hypothesis. That comes in the anticipated findings section, but just to bring the reader back. And another quote from Patton, page 56, if your literature review is well constructed, your questions, purpose, or hypotheses will be seen by your readers as a natural outgrowth of the literature you have reviewed for them. So in other words, it will be organic. It'll come to this organic, natural finish with your particular research question, purpose, or hypothesis as an outgrowth of all of the previous literature on this topic. That it's based on that, but it's taking it into a new direction. So look at example proposals for this. There are a couple at the end of the textbook in Part J, or perhaps it's Part K. I can't remember, but they're all in the last section, proposals 6 and 7. Of course, I'm not going to take the time to read that. You can read it on your own, but see in Model Proposal 6 on page 152 where the literature review starts, see how that's divided up into subsections based on topics or themes or trends or patterns or factors, however you want to call it. It's divided up like that, not divided up by author or by article, but divided up by topics, themes, patterns. And then you can see more of how that literature review is set up there. Lots of sections and subsections here. You are welcome to do the same thing. In fact, the more you divide up into sections like an outline, the kind of easier it can be to organize and manage a literature review. And then Model Proposal 7. Looking at pages 166, 167. Here too, it's divided into sections by themes, topics, patterns. But what I really like here is the first sentence of each paragraph, how it's evaluating the literature, specifically pointing out the weaknesses and critiquing the literature and pointing out the gaps with statements like, there are several important qualifications, however, to the preceding findings. So right before that, in the first paragraph, it talks about what previous literature reviews have said about this topic. Then it gets into what's missing in the findings in previous literature. Then it starts the next paragraph with a third concern. So a third thing that's missing or a third weakness is da 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 da. And then lastly, on page 167, a final concern, da 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 da. And at the end of that paragraph, existing strategies therefore would not be effective necessarily for blah 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 blah. So you're pointing out weaknesses, gaps, particularly clearly pointing out strengths and a gap under the need for a youth perspective section. Starts out in the beginning there by pointing out a strength or what the current literature on this topic does, and then goes on to talk about a gap. At the end of that paragraph, it was noted, however, that apparently no attention had been devoted to obtaining the perspective of young adolescents themselves. And then the first sentence of the next paragraph, the failure to systematically incorporate young adolescents' input into program planning is a noteworthy omission for several reasons. And then that serves as a good introduction there at the end to the writer's actual proposed study. So take a look at that. That will give you some good ideas and tips for writing your own literature review. Okay, so I have two slides here that are kind of checklists for your literature reviews, things you have to do. This first one is probably more detailed and easier to follow, so you may want to follow this one, but if the next slide makes more sense to you, you can follow that one. But you're answering these questions. You're answering at the beginning how in general research in the relevant fields or on your topic addresses the topic. Then you're going into the themes, patterns, and trends that we talked about, and you're having each theme, pattern, or trend be its own section. You're devoting several paragraphs to each theme, pattern, or trend, around 4. If it's not quite 4, that's fine. Then you get into the specifics of what each article says about your theme, pattern, or trend, perhaps one paragraph per an article if all 4 of your articles discuss this theme, pattern, or trend. And end each paragraph with the strengths and weaknesses of the article in terms of both the theme, pattern, or trend at hand and your particular research question. And then end by saying how your research will build on the strengths or fill in the weaknesses. And at the very end, you end each section, with each section being on a certain theme, pattern, or trend. You end each section with a brief concluding paragraph summarizing how your articles address the theme, pattern, or trend. Okay. Now that's a lot to take in. It's one of those things where you kind of have to start doing it and learn by doing and write, and it all sort of comes together as you go. This is basically the same thing. It's another kind of checklist that you may find helpful, not too different from the one before it. The one before it has more specificity. Okay, so what we're going to do now, a bit together, and then I'll have you look at more on your own over the next week, week and a half, is to look at the 2 sample student literature reviews under week 3, documents and resources, and look at my comments in those in red and track changes, because these literature review drafts are not perfect. So you can see what the strengths and weaknesses of them are. And remember, you have an opportunity in class next week to week 4 to ask me questions on these slides, on the video lectures, on the sample student literature reviews. We'll go over these when we meet again in week 4. And in week 4, you have another very short assignment due. It's due Sunday, May 27th at midnight. We will talk more about it in class when we meet on week 4, but I'd like to take a quick look at it now. You need to write a 1-page report or statement on your interview assignment if you decide to do that, or on your pilot study if you decide to do that. You're just basically telling me whom you plan to interview and when and why you chose them, or with the pilot study, same kinds of questions. Whom or what are you studying, when, and why. Basically having a short plan for what you're going to do. Just a lot like in social research design when you told me what you were planning to do for your interview assignment there. A little longer than that, but you're answering the same types of questions. Okay, so let's take a quick look at these things. So under week 3, documents and resources, you have a couple of sample student literature reviews. This one here is really excellent, the student's literature review, for the way she set it up by topics, which you can see in italics, topics and themes, and patterns. And she looked at a lot more than just 4 peer-reviewed research articles, and she synthesized everything. Synthesis is another key word for writing literature reviews. So she synthesized all of it and really evaluated them. So take a look at that, and you may want to model your literature review after that one. There's another one in here under documents and resources. Here's another student's, and this one, see how it's also set up into sections based on themes or topics, and he does a good job as well of critiquing each article, pointing out the strengths and the weaknesses. I have more comments in here. So take a look at those. That will help make sense of everything I just said in the slides, as well as the sample proposals in the back of the book. Here in week 4, in the assignments folder, you can see the instructions for the 1-page interview progress report or the 1-page pilot study statement. Really, I think, easy to follow instructions to know what to do. So I'll let you look at that on your own and then get back to me by email or during our week 4 class meeting if you have any questions. But basically what you're going to do is by Sunday, May 27th at midnight, you are going to post on the week 4 discussion board the names of your interview subjects, how you know them, their professional titles, why you've selected them, and your specific plans for the interview. That is, if you decide to do the interview assignment. If you do the pilot study assignment, you're telling me the same basic things, but about your pilot study. The names or pseudonyms of your participants, how you know the participants or how you found them, why you've selected these participants, why you've selected the method you have. In general, why. I know you haven't written your methods section yet, and your specific plans for when and where your pilot study will take place. Now, I realize now that some of you are doing content analyses for your research proposals, and these questions really apply more to other types of studies like the ones not listed here, but in the actual instructions for the pilot study assignment under week 6, which you could look at now. But I think we can easily modify this for content analyses. If you're having trouble doing that, let me know. So instead of the names or pseudonyms of your participants, the names of the items you're analyzing for content, how you found them or why you chose them, how you know of these artifacts, if you will, or pieces of media that you've chosen, why you've selected content analysis in terms of your research question, and your specific plans for conducting the content analysis. But if you want me to write that out for you, just let me know. I may just add that to these instructions here on Blackboard. Okay, so all of that should have you set for when we meet again on Wednesday, May 23rd. So these are the things you're going to be working on before then. The annotated bibliography, which I covered in my first video lecture, your introduction, which I covered in the second video lecture in terms of citing, and also during our week 2 class meeting, and then this literature review, and also your one-page progress report or statement for your interview assignment or your pilot study. All right, email me if you have any questions or concerns.